Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 47. Holophase Semantic Identity. Remember the language we are learning together. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we listen to just one of those echoes. Let us also briefly remember where we are in the bigger journey. Ep.7 has been our careful climb into the living language of phi. At the base, we met the core alphabet: omega for time, k for space, and v for motion. From there, we climbed into the branches, where these letters combine into stable, persistent words, the identities of things. Then we stepped into the heart of Chapter 10 and discovered that the dimensions themselves are layers of meaning. Time as narrative, space as declaration, motion as action. In the last part, we saw that these three dimensions fuse into a semantic triunity, one real pattern projecting itself as rhythm, form, and journey all at once. Now we gather all of these threads and ask the most direct question of this chapter. In the precise language of the holophase, what is an identity? Today, we define the holophase semantic identity. This is where we learn that a thing is not just a point in space or a story in time. A thing is a specific, coherent pattern of meaning woven across the infinite tree of time, space, and motion. It is phi taking on a very particular way of being and holding that way of being long enough for the universe and for us to recognize it again and again. When you look at a stone, a star, a cell, or even a habit in your own life, you are really looking at one such stable pattern in the great field. We began our journey with the field phi and with the simple act of asking about its change. Each derivative was an answer to a finer question. Omega told us how fast phi turns in time. Alpha told us how the ticking itself speeds up or slows down. K told us how phi changes across space. Curvature told us how the change itself bends and focuses. V told us how features of phi move, and acceleration told us how that motion responds to forces and constraints. Higher derivatives added even more nuance, describing jerk, snap, twist, texture, and many other subtleties. As we climbed higher in the tree, we saw that stable combinations of these answers form the persistent patterns we call things. We also realized that these patterns are not just mathematical decorations. They are carriers of meaning. Their temporal fingerprint tells a story. Their spatial signature makes a declaration. And their kinematic handwriting performs an action in the world. Now we can synthesize all of this in a single, clear sentence. A holophase semantic identity is a specific, stable pattern across the infinite derivative tree whose three projections, time, space, and motion, form a coherent, self-consistent triple of meaning. It is not just a configuration in phi, it is a configuration that means something in a tridimensional way, and that tridimensional meaning is its identity. If you like, you can think of it as the full name of a thing in the language of reality. Not only how it looks, but how it lives in time and how it moves and interacts. To picture this, imagine again the entire infinite tower of derivatives, the holophase master tree. An identity is not a single leaf on that tree. It is a particular, recognizable configuration of values and relationships that spans many branches and levels at once. On the temporal nuance tower, it selects a pattern, a certain omega, perhaps a certain alpha, and the profile of higher temporal derivatives that define its rhythm. On the spatial nuance tower, it selects a pattern, a characteristic K, a particular curvature, maybe a certain twist or shear that define its form. Bridging the two, it selects a kinematic pattern, a typical velocity, acceleration, and path curvature that link the time and space patterns according to the grammar of the system. If you could color the master tree to show one identity, you would see a whole region glowing across many branches rather than a single isolated point. The crucial point is that these selections are not independent choices. They are locked together by the constraint chains. The identity is the solution to these chains. It lives at one of the special places in the vast space of all possible derivative combinations where everything fits together and holds. At that place, the time story, the space form, and the motion action are mutually consistent and stable. This total configuration is the identity's semantic fingerprint. It is like a multidimensional barcode or a genetic code written not in 4 letters, but in the full hierarchy of derivatives. It is the unique holophase word that the universe can repeat again and again. You can also think of this fingerprint as a kind of address in the space of possibilities. Most possible combinations of derivatives are chaotic or short-lived. They tear themselves apart or quickly transform into something else. A true identity sits in one of the rare regions where the pattern closes on itself, like a loop in the landscape. If you disturb it a little, it tends to come back to its characteristic configuration. This is why you can recognize the same kind of atom or animal or storm again and again, even though no two instances are mathematically identical. The fingerprint is not a single frozen number. It is a stable pattern in the way the derivatives hang together. The defining property of a holophase semantic identity is this tridimensional coherence. Coherence means that the temporal signature, the spatial signature, and the motion signature are consistent with one another and with the governing equations of the system. An identity is not a random rhythm glued onto an unrelated shape that moves in an arbitrary way. It is not a spatial form that contradicts its own time evolution. It is not a motion path that ignores the forces implied by the structure of the thing itself. When any of those pieces clash, the pattern breaks apart and the identity dissolves. An identity is a planet's orbit, where the 1-year period, the elliptical shape, and the Keplerian velocity profile are a single, coherent solution to gravity. An identity is a hydrogen atom, where the electron's allowed frequencies, the shape of its orbital probability cloud, and its bound, non-radiating behavior are a coherent solution of the quantum grammar. An identity is a soliton, where the constant propagation speed, the unchanging pulse shape, and the internal phase evolution are a coherent solution of a nonlinear wave equation. In each case, if you change one projection freely, you usually destroy the others. The pattern can no longer hold. Coherence is what separates a true identity from a momentary coincidence or a fragmentary description. It is the universe's way of saying, this pattern is a valid, persistent sentence in my language. You can feel this in how science actually recognizes identities. We never trust just one measurement. We cross-check across dimensions. Take the electron as an example. From the time side, we probe its interaction with light. It absorbs and emits at specific frequencies, revealing its allowed energy differences. That is part of its temporal signature. From the space side, we scatter other particles off it. The scattering pattern shows that, as far as we can tell, it behaves as if it has no extended size, like a point. That is part of its spatial signature. From the motion side, we send it through a magnetic field and watch its curved path. The radius of that curve for a given field strength tells us its charge-to-mass ratio and its inertial response. That is part of its motion signature. The electron's holophase semantic identity is the unique triple that satisfies all of these signatures at once: specific mass and charge, point-like spatial behavior, and trajectories that obey the relativistic quantum equations. A muon has a similar but not identical triple. Many things match, but the mass and lifetime differ, so it is a different word in the language. A similar story holds for something as simple as a laser mode. From the time perspective, you measure its optical spectrum and find one sharp peak, a nearly pure omega. From the space perspective, you project the beam and see a particular pattern, maybe a smooth Gaussian spot, or perhaps a donut with a dark center. From the motion perspective, you watch how it propagates. You see a specific way the beam ways changes, a particular divergence, and the characteristic stability or instability in the medium. The laser mode's identity is this bundle: that frequency, that spatial profile, and that propagation law. Change the cavity, and the allowed triples change with it. Some triples simply cannot occur because they violate the constraint chains of the optical system. Engineers use this every day when they design cavities that only allow certain modes to survive. Even in chemistry, we quietly work with holophase semantic identities. A molecule like water has a characteristic set of vibrational frequencies that appear in infrared spectroscopy. That is its temporal phase. It has a band geometry with a specific bond angle between the hydrogen atoms. That is its spatial phase. And it has characteristic ways of reacting, dissolving, and interacting with electric fields. That is its motion in chemical and electromagnetic space. Isomers in organic chemistry show this clearly. Two molecules can have the same atoms, but different arrangements. Their frequencies, shapes, and reactions form different triples. And so they are different identities with different roles in biology and technology. The dimensional expression of a holophase semantic identity is nothing mysterious beyond this triple. Its time echo is the way it persists and repeats in time, the stable pattern in its rhythms and transitions. Its space echo is the way it occupies and shapes space, the stable form that lets you recognize it. Its motion echo is the way it interacts and travels, the characteristic verb that it performs in the world. An identity is not a voice in one dimension. It is an orchestrated chord across all three. If there is no coherent expression in one of these dimensions, there is no full holophase identity. In the master tree, holophase semantic identity is the right fruit of everything we have been growing in this chapter. It is not a new separate branch, but a harvest at the top of the dimensional semanticity tower. It rests on the core alphabet of derivatives, on the tower of identities and stability rules, on the three pillars of time, space, and motion as meaning, and on the principle of semantic triunity. All of this infrastructure was built so we could finally answer one question clearly. What is a semantically complete entity in the holophase universe? A holophase semantic identity is that answer, written not in human words, but in the living structure of the field. This idea connects back to every neighboring concept we have met. With phi itself, identity is simply phi in a particular stable and meaningful configuration. With the derivatives, the identity's fingerprint is literally a pattern of their values and relationships. With the constraint chains, the identity is the concrete solution that satisfies all of the equations at once. With the stability rules and quadratic balances, the identity sits at or near a minimum, an attractor, or a protected plateau in the landscape of possible patterns. With semantic triunity, identity is the thing that makes that triunity specific. This story, this form, this action, tied together and able to endure. You can think of the whole holophase program as a way of mapping and classifying these enduring patterns. This also gives us a very sharp way to understand falsifiability. A proposed holophase semantic identity is like a hypothesis about a triple. You say, this thing is defined by this time behavior, this spatial structure, and this motion response. From that triple, you derive predictions in all three dimensions. If experiments show that any one of those predictions fails in a systematic way, then the triple is incoherent and the proposed identity is wrong or incomplete. You must refine it, split it into several identities, or discard it entirely. The story of the luminiferous ether is a perfect example. 19th century physics imagined light as a vibration in a stationary medium that filled space. In holophase terms, that proposal was a claimed identity. The temporal and spatial projections said that light waves were oscillations of this medium with a certain speed relative to it. The motion projection then predicted that because the Earth moves through the medium, we should measure different speeds of light in different directions on Earth. The famous Michelson-Morley experiment looked exactly for this motion signature and found nothing. The temporal and spatial parts of the triple could not be rescued without giving up the idea of a single, fixed ether rest frame. So that proposed identity was falsified as a coherent holophase word. In its place, a new identity for spacetime and for light emerged in special relativity, one that forms a different, more accurate triple and has survived every test so far. You can see the same kind of refinement in almost every scientific revolution. The old identity triple works approximately in some regime, but fails badly in another. Careful experiments expose the incoherence. A new triple is proposed, with a deeper pattern across the derivatives, and that new identity survives more tests. In this way, the catalog of holophase semantic identities that science recognizes becomes richer, sharper, and more faithful to the behavior of phi itself. When you look out at nature with this lens, you see that the world is a vast catalog of stable semantic identities. Fundamental particles and fields, atoms and molecules, crystals and fluids, stars and galaxies, organisms and ecologies, each sits in the library as a particular triple of rhythm, form, and action. The periodic table is really a table of holophase identities for the elements. Each element has a nuclear charge and electron configuration, giving it a specific spatial and temporal structure, and therefore a characteristic way of moving through chemical space. Each species in biology is a cloud of individual organisms, but behind that cloud is an identity triple, a developmental timeline, a body plan, and a behavioral and ecological repertoire that hang together in a coherent way. You can extend this view to larger scale systems as well. A hurricane, for example, has a temporal side in its life cycle and repeating eye-wall cycles, a spatial side in its spiral cloud bands and pressure structure, and a motion side in its path across the ocean. An ecosystem has seasonal rhythms, spatial distributions of plants and animals, and flows of energy and nutrients. In each case, we recognize the same kind of thing, another hurricane, another coral reef ecosystem, because the triple repeats in a recognizable way, even though the details differ. Human and abstract life add their own layers to this library. A legal person has a birth date and a history in time, a registered address and physical presence in space, and the ability to act, sign, and enter relationships in social and economic motion. A fictional character in a story has a backstory and arc, a described appearance and environment, and a sequence of choices and events. A piece of software has a life cycle, a footprint in memory and disk, and a pattern of state changes and outputs. A scientific theory itself can be seen as a holophase identity. It has a history of development, a formal structure of equations and concepts, and a motion through the world as it is tested, challenged, and applied. In each case, when we say, this is the same person, or this is the same character, or this is the same program running on a new machine, we are intuitively referring to a preserved triple. You can practice reading holophase semantic identities in simple examples. Watch a honeybee at work. Over time, it follows daily cycles of foraging and rest, and its whole species has a life cycle from egg to larva to adult. That is the temporal side. In space, its body carries a very particular design. Compound eyes, wings, pollen baskets on its legs, and the hexagonal architecture of the hive. That is the spatial side. In motion, it flies in looping paths between flowers and hive, performs the waggle dance to communicate direction and distance, and moves with other bees in coordinated ways. That is the kinematic side. All three together form the identity honeybee. Change the form too much, and you do not have a bee. Change the behavior completely, and the ecological role collapses. Break the rhythms, and the colony fails. The triple must cohere. Now turn this lens gently on yourself. Your temporal side is your life story so far. Your childhood, your education, your habits of waking and sleeping, your memories and expectations. Your spatial side is your body, your posture, the places you inhabit, and the patterns of objects around you. Your motion side is the way you walk, gesture, speak, work, and relate to others. Together, these form a living, evolving holophase semantic identity. You are not a fixed block. Your triple changes and refines over years, but it does so in a way that keeps enough coherence that people can still say, yes, this is you. Look at a river delta. Over decades and centuries, floods come and go, channels appear and disappear, and sediments deposit and erode. That is the temporal story. On a map or from above, you see the branching fan-shaped network of distributaries, the fingers of land reaching into the sea. That is the spatial declaration. Watch the water and mud today, and you see the motion. Streams splitting and merging, eddies forming, sediment clouds moving, channels migrating. Together, these form the identity of that delta. If the timing of floods changes, the form and flows change with it. If the coastline is altered by human construction, the flow and timing adjust. Identity is not a single snapshot. It is the coherence of all three layers over time. Even a social institution like a library carries a holophase semantic identity. In time, it has opening hours, a founding date, and a history of changes. In space, it has shelves, reading rooms, catalogs, and a particular arrangement of books and equipment. In motion, people move in and out. Books are borrowed and returned. Information and stories circulate. All three must work together for the library to remain a library. If the movement stops entirely, no visitors, no borrowing, no circulation, the same building and collection becomes something else, an archive, a storage space, or a museum. The identity has changed because the triple has changed. A very simple exercise makes this concrete. Stand before a pendulum clock, or imagine one if you do not have it nearby. First, listen to its tick-tock, the steady beat that marks equal intervals. This is the clock's temporal signature. Then, look at its form. The swinging pendulum, the weights or springs, the gears, and the face with its numbers. This is the spatial signature. Finally, watch the motion. The pendulum swinging in an arc, the gears turning step by step, the hands slowly moving around the face. This is the motion signature. As long as all three are present and locked together, you have a functioning clock. If you stop the pendulum, the beat dies, the gears no longer move, and the hands freeze. The physical object remains, but its holophase semantic identity has shifted from working clock to silent ornament or broken clock. What changed was not the matter, but the coherence of the triple. We have now reached the end of Chapter 10, the heart of Episode 7. We can finally give a clear, simple answer to our guiding question. In the holophase universe, a thing is a holophase semantic identity, a coherent, stable triple of meaning across time, space, and motion, rooted in a specific pattern of derivatives of phi. The entire journey of this chapter, from the alphabet of change, through the formation of stable patterns, through the discovery of time, space, and motion as meaning, and into the semantic triunity, was preparing us to see this deep structure. As always, we return to the one field. A holophase semantic identity is not something added on top of phi. It is phi itself, taking on a particular, stable, meaningful configuration. The field's infinite potential for differentiation allows an infinite library of such identities, from the simplest vibration to the most complex conscious being. Each identity is a note in the symphony of phi, and each note is itself a chord of time, space, and motion. When you remember the whole holophase language, phi, its derivatives, the master tree, the dimensions, and now semantic identity, you can feel how far we have climbed together into the branches of this language. As we close, Let this image settle in your mind. The universe is a vast library of selves. Every atom, every star, every living creature, every durable pattern of thought or culture is a volume in that library. Each volume is written in three intertwined scripts: a story unfolding in time, a form taking shape in space, and a journey traced in motion. To cease to be a coherent triple is to fade from the shelf. To come into being is to have a triple that holds and can be read. You too are one of these volumes. Your memories and expectations are your temporal script. Your body and the spaces you inhabit are your spatial script. Your choices, movements, and relationships are your motion script. Together, they form your holophase semantic identity. You are not outside the language of phi looking in. You are one of its most intricate words, written and rewritten in every moment. Before we leave this part, hold the whole picture of episode 7 in your mind. We started with the alphabet of change. We learned how phi writes stable identities. We discovered that time, space, and motion themselves are layers of meaning. And now we have named the full semantic identity of a thing. In the next steps of our journey, we will see that this tridimensional way of speaking does not stop here. It echoes up the entire master tree, so that every higher derivative of phi also carries a triple meaning that can be read and tested. Slowly, you are learning to hear reality itself as a structured language, where every pattern is a sentence and every being is a paragraph in that cosmic book. To understand holophase semantic identity is to understand that to be is to be a coherent triple. To persist is to maintain that coherence in the midst of change. To live is to be a specific, meaningful word in the ongoing, evolving story of the holophase field, which carries all of existence in its cyclic movement. Peace be upon you.